Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the local Yocal Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little banner before we get into the stories, but I understand if you are short on time, so we provided the timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the stories that you are interested in. For those that stayed, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here today. The banter is going to be just a little bit shorter, mainly for the fact that John, my usual co-host, is out sick, and it wouldn't do too well for him to be on camera or on audio, hearing him with his voice and stuff right now. So he's resting up. If you want to pray for him, that would be much appreciated. Also, when I usually say the timestamps, the cool thing YouTube will sometimes do, and I was just talking with someone and I realized this is something some people don't know, but below there'll actually be these little sections in YouTube. I think YouTube's the only one that does it, where you can see each one of the sections of the show, so you can jump to wherever you want to get to. So hopefully that helps you. You might have not known that there before, but for you guys, they're on audio only, or on Rumble or Twitter, I think is another place that we post it there. That won't be there, but for YouTube people, which is I think primarily most of our views come from, that's what that is there. But anywho, briefly coming into one of the topics that's been going on a lot here in Idaho is heat. I think this is like the third week in a row that I hope you're staying cool. The last couple I've mentioned that. Hopefully you've been working through that and staying cool and staying inside. I know as I'm recording this on Friday, it is cooling down a little bit, and I'm so happy. Praise the Lord for that. But hopefully you've been able to stay cool and also being able to breathe all right. The smoke in the latter half of the week that came through has not been the best. It's been quite smoky. Granted, a little teaser there, that will be our second story or second segment for this show today. So we'll get into that a little bit about what exactly is causing a lot of the smoke and kind of the fires around the state and some stuff about fire stuff there. Also, another little thing that I would let you know about is that there is not going to be any Sunday show coming up next week. I'm going to be going for a little bit of vacation. I don't do it very often, so not going to be here to record that one. But never fear, the midweek report should be unaffected and will move forward as planned. But the Sunday show, we're just going to take a little bit of a break, plus maybe give John, because sometimes these bugs, it seems after COVID, these bugs last a lot longer and stuff, so just give him some extra time there. Barring that, I have been trying to stay inside cool and not getting, breathing a ton of smoke-filled air, so I don't have too much per se to share with you besides actually what we're going to be talking about in the segments here. So let's just go into the main body of the show here. Which, before we get to the smoky stuff, the first segment here I want to look at is our Idaho Bill breakdown. I realized that there's a big bill that went into effect. Most of them went into effect on July 1st, and we're wrapping up July, and we're seeing kind of some of the effects of them. But there's one in particular that we've talked a lot about on this show and program, but I actually haven't done. I realized looking back through and stuff that we didn't do an Idaho Bill breakdown on it, so I wanted to do it here. That would be House Bill 710. It aims to remove harmful materials from Idaho's libraries. Since it was introduced, this bill, as I tease, has been discussed repeatedly in Idaho politics, but now that it has passed and gone into effect, it's worth noting to look at what has ended up being the effects of this bill. In this Idaho Bill breakdown, we'll look at how House Bill 710 tries to remove harmful material from libraries and close a loophole that's abused. Well, answering, does this destroy free speech? Are the definitions in the bill too vague? Because that's a common thing I've heard about with this bill, people making objections to it. And will it cost Idahoans? Is this system going to cost libraries more to try to get those harmful materials? And is it costing more than it's worth? But before we can do that, we need to go down and look exactly what the bill says. For that, House Bill 710, or another term that's used within its vernacular, is the Children's School and Library Protection Act, was sponsored by Representative Jaron Crane in the House and Senator Cindy Carlson in the Senate. It aims to require public schools and community libraries to take reasonable steps to restrict children's access to obscene or harmful material. It aims to do this by giving parents and guardians the ability to take civil action against schools and libraries that allow children to access harmful materials. Which, we'll get into the definitions there, but if we're just taking that on face value, I think that's good intent. Oftentimes we forget about with laws and stuff that there is the intent behind the law and then there's the application. So it's not always that a bill that ends up being a bad thing was done through bad intentions. So that is the intent, but going into what are the key components, what does the exact verbiage of this do? And then we can break apart if we think this is going to go badly. It expands the definition of harmful to minors to include materials, quote, that have a dominant effect of substantially arousing sexual desire in those under 18. It prohibits schools and public libraries from promoting, giving, or making available to minors visual representations or depicting of nudity, sexual conduct, or sodomyastic abuse that could be harmful to minors. It establishes a cause of action for minors or their parents/guardians against schools or libraries that violate these provisions. It requires schools and libraries to have a form for requesting review and potential removal of the materials, and it allows for a statutory damages of about $250 plus actual damages incurred if the claim is successful. It also provides affirmative defense for institutions that had reasonable cause to believe that the minor was 18 or older, or if the minor was accompanied by a parent or adult. Basically, that if the institution said, hey, there's a reasonable understanding that we thought they were an adult, or we took precautionary steps, or there was an adult with them, it's not our problem if then the parent shows them something that's abusive or whatever else, because we did the steps we could, and that was beyond out of our control. We did what we could, so we're not liable for that. Now, the part I teased earlier that a lot of people are critiquing this bill on and going through it here is the definitions. I'm not going to go through all of them because this is a family-friendly show, and obviously this is a bill that's going to be very pointed and exact in its wording sometimes so that there isn't any vagueness. Some of them I'm going to skip over here, but I'm going to just go surface level, maybe a couple. I'll let you use your discretion there. I'll say the definition of the word. If you need to turn it off or skip a couple seconds ahead, you can do that, but I want to give that to your parents out there. But those definitions, the first, minors, it's a very simple one, any person less than 18 years of age. The next one is nudity, showing of human male or female genitalia, public area, or buttocks with less than full obscure covering, or showing certain female anatomy, less than obscuring or covering any portion below, blah, 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 or depicting male genitalia. So I cleaned it up a little bit there, but you can go look at it. It goes into more in deep detail. Another one is sexual conduct. That one, you can get the idea. The bill goes through. It's talking about different like masturbation, homosexuality, sexual intercourse, physical contact with another person, and stuff like that, and different anatomy parts. Sexual excitement is another one it defines. Sodomyastic abuse, it goes into that. Harmful for minors. Now, this is the definition. Some people are a little worried. It breaks out into two components. The first one is material depicting nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, or sodomyastic abuse that appeals to the prurient interests and patently obvious to prevailing standards. And then two, that the material has a dominant effect of substantially arousing the sexual desire in a person under 18 years of age. So first, basically, that it's showing sexual things in nature or sexual actions that people would be doing, which are not a bad thing, but in the privacy of the bedroom. And then secondly, just stating if the imagery, if say you have a book and it's anatomy, I guess you could get aroused by anatomy in a certain sense, but it's that to a certain degree isn't per se describing the act. It's just, hey, this is what the human body looks like if we're looking at an anatomy book. So it gives that provision so it doesn't apply to that. When an image is actually aiming to excite someone, trying to get those sexual desires going, what we talk about with like porn and stuff like that. Their definition, next one is material, anything tangible which is harmful to minors, whether derived through the media of reading, observation, or sound. So it doesn't have to be just written stuff. It can be an audiobook or something. Another definition is performance, any play, motion, picture, dance, or exhibition performed before an audience. And then their definition of promote, which there again, these definitions matter. If we know them, then we know what we're operating from, especially if anybody's taking logic out there. The definition they have there for promote is to manufacture, issue, sell, give, provide, deliver, publish, distribute, circulate, disseminate, present, exhibit, or advertise, or to offer or agree to do the same. So that's what their definition is there of promoting. The one is knowingly, having general knowledge of or reason to know or belief or reasonable grounds for belief which warrants further inspection or inquiry. So basically, if you have a hunch that this person's not under 18, That's what the knowingly part is, that you should knowingly take steps to try to figure that out and take action. School, any public or private school providing instruction for students in kindergarten through grade 12, kind of giving a little bit of a definition there of what schools it applies to. But that kind of gets us to the definition. I wanted to give that to make sure it's clear. If you want to go to the bill to read the exact ones, there's a couple I skipped over. Please, more than welcome. That'll be in the link in the description. But these definitions will percolate more as we go on later here. But many times, you need a little bit of context. Obviously, Idaho on the book has rules talking about pornography and that it shouldn't be shown to minors. But before this bill, Idaho libraries and schools had local control over their collections and did not have any specific provisions restricting them from providing certain materials to minors. So for the most part, technically, the library didn't have any law or restriction that said that it couldn't show graphic or pornographic images or anything else. The main idea behind that is that the library is going to be sensible enough not to show that. It's an educational institution, so we're going to be a bit more lax. Now, for us on the more conservative side, we make the argument that the library has abused that responsibility and that longer leash, and so this bill's pulling that in. For those on their side, they'll call that censorship. They'll call that being authoritative or whatever else, which that kind of brings us into this conclusion. Conservatives and Idahoans see this as a way to ensure that libraries and school libraries don't have questionable content out there where minors could see it and get a hold of it, because we believe that minors shouldn't look at that stuff. And this, as you can guess, like most things, goes with a larger national trend of communities and states regulating and looking more closely at what educational institutions and stuff are doing or teaching minors. This is happening at the public school. This is happening schools in general, just looking at what's being done with our children. What's doing? How's the education system working? A greater interest and focus on that. The biggest kind of takeaways or definable effects, if we're just stripping away all the rhetoric, is that one, parents will technically have more control over the type of materials their children can access in schools and public libraries. You might see that as a bad thing if you think the parent's bad, and so children should be able to see some of this stuff, and they don't want overprotective parents hiding it from them. But it does give more, in a sense, back to them that parents can object to more material in those and thus have a little bit more control over what's in the libraries and the school libraries. The next one is that minors might find it more difficult to access the certain material we talked about above if it is there in the library. Another one is that library patrons might notice changes in how materials are organized or presented within the library. And you might have different things in like a young adult section or adult only parts there on controversial content. So that's the things you're going to see independent of my application or emotional things. That's just probably what's going to play out and seems to be playing out across the state. We're seeing different municipalities doing different stuff. But anytime we go and we're talking about books or banning books or burning books or stuff like that, we get to the topic of censorship, right? You hear the regular argument, they were burning books in Berlin, right? They talk about censorship, authoritative states. And before we can dive in like anything that I've learned, you need to define your definitions. What is censorship, and is this it? And so for that, I went back to basically, our culture kind of likes to play with words a little bit, that they've never been that way before. So I went to the Webster's 1812 dictionary, so way back before we're talking about political correctness or anything else, looking at what basically, to a certain degree, close to what the founding fathers would have used for their definitions. The word censorship actually didn't have to do with anything that we think of. As a noun, it is the officer or dignitary of a censor, the time which a censor holds his office. So not quite the more modern definition we would have of censorship. Now, if you go to the word censor, and I have a link if you want to go search this on the 1812 dictionary Webster, but if you search censor in there, the definition it has is one who is empowered to examine all manuscripts and books before they are committed to the press to see that they contain nothing heretical or immoral. Which, I mean, to a certain degree, I would say, yeah, this is censoring, but that's where we need to look at our definitions. Sometimes we make words out to be boogie words, and they're dangerous. A perfect example that what the left's done, right, is the word gay. The word gay used to just mean that someone's gay, they're excited, they're happy, but the left has turned it into a term that refers to sexuality. I don't know if you're pointing to one group or whatever that's changed the definition of censor, but in a sense, if censoring or to censor is to have someone that they look at a material to see if it contains nothing heretical or immoral, this bill may actually land in that. But to give the contrast, the modern Oxford Dictionary, which is basically Google's definition when you go and search that, that's what Google cites. The definition they have for censorship is the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered abusive, politically unacceptable, or threaten to security. A little bit different than the more old school one. The old school one didn't even touch on that at all. And then equally for the word censor, the Oxford modern one says, any official who examines material that is about to be released, such as books, movies, news, and art, and suppresses any parts that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or threaten to security. Which one element, I'll get to it here in a second, but one part of it is, we've talked about it before, the more libertarian definition of freedom, a more conservative view of freedom. In modern era, a lot of people will look at these definitions and say, the modern definition of freedom is I have infinite amount of choices I can do. I have as many things as I can desire to do, and that is true freedom. The traditional definition is that, yeah, you have freedom to do good, but you do not have freedom to do vice, to do wrong, to do evil. And that's why we have laws that punish evil, because no, you can't murder. Because by a more modern definition, murder's fine, all these things are fine, because technically that creates greater freedom. I have more options. I have the option to not kill someone and to kill someone. Look, I have more options, so I am technically more free. But the traditional American and English, by icto facto their way of looking at the definition of freedom is that you are free to do what is good. And so laws will be written as so far to help us be free to do what is good and not to do wrong. We are not free. We should not have ultimate, absolute freedom to do wrong. And so with this definition of censorship, which the modern Oxford is really close to it, but I prefer the 1812 Webster's there. If you're coming from a more libertarian standpoint, respectfully, as best as I understand it, and I might have it wrong, please comment below, you would maybe disagree with that definition. No, we shouldn't censor based on that definition. But personally, as a conservative and also as a Christian, I would counter to say, no, it's good to censor because we want to remove that material which is immoral from our society, and we should have materials that are good and they're educational. I'm not sitting here, and I don't think hardly anybody that writes these laws or whatever else, as some might try to postulate, don't want your kids to be able to read anatomy books. By no means. The goal is to get rid of content that is encouraging kids to get excited about a thing, an action that is meant for the bedroom, for adults to have. And that also brings me to another key point I want to make on this, is that there is a difference between minors and adults. Even I have the conservative position, say someone has the libertarian one about this bill and the way it's applied. We should be able to reach across the aisle on this, that minors are not endowed with the same freedoms as adults are. Adults they have greater responsibility and thus greater freedom for that responsibility in our society. This bill is just saying material that basically we as the governing people through our legislature have said that it's too mature. This needs to be a material that has a developed brain and mind and conscience that can work through these motions and properly consume it right. If you're saying that content is edifying and good for people to consume right, we're just saying no. Minors not. They're still developing, they're learning, they're growing, they're being educated about the world around them, and that material is not ready for them yet. And I think that's somewhere where the more maybe libertarian person or even the anarchist we could get across on and saying that the difference between definitions for minors and adults is different. I might be able to sympathize with you a little bit more if this was saying that adults couldn't see this content. Technically, according to this bill, has nothing to say that you couldn't walk into a public library and say they had some more obscene or obscure material that as an adult I couldn't go and look at it. It's purely talking about that under 18 bracket there. And so my argument would be that would be the first one there for it being a little bit of a better bill. And also then that brings us to another objection there, is the definition of it vague. I would argue that it's not. We went through those. It has a bunch of different definitions of what it's talking about. You might argue that the definition of what the community decides is not being vague or isn't correct. It might be too vague depending on what community is interpreting and stuff. And You might be right there. I'll give you grant that. Maybe it should be more precise. And I know bills before this were more precise, but the legislature didn't want to pass those through. And it's been something that's been going on for a couple of years, and they've been trying with. And so the language has been, it's at a mishmash of where both sides of the party are willing to accept it to go through the legislature, which if you're wanting it to be more detailed, if you agree with the bill, but it's too vague, that's where maybe you reach out to your legislature and ask them to be more poignant, be more direct, and maybe add an amendment to this bill and stuff, if you think that's the problem. Now, if you have a problem with it being vague just because that's one of your arguments of why this bill shouldn't have been written at all, I might have a little bit of a question to you of, there's one thing in an objection, brother, but come with also a solution. You have an objection, you don't like it, cool. What's your solution? Is your solution no bill at all? Which, cool, we can argue and discuss on that. Or is it, no, it needs to be more defined in its definitions, which my argument would be we tried, and then you should reach out maybe if your legislature is one of those that shut down the more defined examples of this bill. Also, the fact it does have a lot of definitions in there. But if you disagree with the definitions or think it's too vague, I really would love to hear your objections or examples of that. Please put it down in the comment section below. You engaging with us helps a ton. And then the second objection is cost-wise. Will this cost more? Does the cost warrant the amount of benefit it's bringing back and stuff? And my answer to that is I know the downtown Boise Public Library does technically have an adult section. If I go to the third floor up there and I want to look at some documents, I have to have an adult with me to go see those. Or I at least have to have an adult librarian with me to go see those because they're files and documents. And that doesn't overburden the libraries to do that. Some might say it does cause more cost. My answer to this is it causes more cost when you don't want to get rid of the material that's stated there, and so you have to have a chaperone system or a separate section there. But if the libraries are willing to just say, okay, fine, the legislature's spoken, we are the servants, we serve the legislature, we're the library, we get funds from the government to do our stuff right, and we're going to obey, we're going to comply with what the legislature has passed. And if people get mad, well, go to your representatives. We're just the school. We're obeying the law of the land here and getting rid of it, then it's not going to be more cost. You're going to have less books there, and those books that would have had an issue are not there, and you don't need to make a separate section. The only time it's going to incur a cost is if you are a group that wants to keep those books. If those are a group that wants to do that, and maybe I think Donnelly was a library up there, that there is just so small they can't make a separate section. So right now they've set it up where you cannot go into the library without an adult with you until they build a separate section. Then yeah, it's going to cost more money. But that's where then the community speaks. If the community wants to raise enough money to add on to there and justify that, then they will. But if they don't, then the people are like, no, I just want you to get rid of it. And that's how local politics will play out. So my answer to that objection is it only costs you if you want to basically weasel around the law and if you want to mess with it. An example of some people are trying to weasel with it is I've heard that Ada County is saying, okay, we'll get rid of the material, but also the bill technically doesn't tell us who we can allow or not allow to sue or object. So they're going to limit it to being people in the school district. So only those that can prove that they're going to public school can do it. That might just be for the public school libraries rather than the public libraries, because obviously I can't walk into a public school library because that's for the students of the school rather than I'm not a student there. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because that's technically saying we're selecting the people who can and can't sue us, which could be interesting. I don't know if that's going to make it to the Idaho Supreme Court, but I wanted to give that the viewer, for a little context. But I think summarizing there, my end objection on that, or response would be a better word for it, is it only costs you if you want to type a weasel and mess around and do stuff with it. If you're willing to just say, fine, you don't want it, you're the people that are paying us, you're the people that are deciding, then no, it's not going to cost you, and it's not really going to be a problem. Which, if you really enjoyed that Idaho Bill breakdown, please make sure to like it. Also, if you want to keep up to date on all the stuff about Idaho, because we cover a ton of it, or just want to look at more of the content when it comes out, we're going to be clipping the Idaho Bill breakdowns out of these Sunday shows for you. Please follow us on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter to stay up to date on all of it. If you want to see even more of our content, we're moving into written stuff, and then there's going to be, I think, some live streams for paid people. You can go check out our Substack that we're building out there. Also, if you found the content valuable, please share it with friends and family. If you did know about this bill or did, and you're wanting a concise, nice video to just send over to them about House Bill 710, please consider sharing it to them. Your support really does help us spread the word about our beautiful state and keep Idaho informed and engaged in what's going on and keeping Idaho, Idaho. With that said, thank you for being part of Local Yocal Idaho, the community we have here, and let's move on to the next segment. So coming into our next segment here, and I teased it at the beginning here in the banter, Idaho fire season, why it's so smoky, for goodness gracious. As all of our lungs can tell, this fire season is starting here in Idaho. I don't know if it's just here in the Treasure Valley, but specifically here we've had a lot of it with all the hot weather, and it's just been very thick. But for those who didn't grow up here, you might be wondering why and how is this happening? Why is it happening so much? If you're maybe someone from back east, where it's more likely for you to be like, why won't it stop raining, than the smoke part of it. In this section, I'm glad you asked, because we're going to be giving you a list of the fires that are burning around Idaho, so you can know rather than just being like, where is the smoke coming from? No, that's where it's coming from. The details on those, and look at the common ways that fires start here in the Northwest. For those that are locals like myself, this might be a little bit of a review, but we have a lot of new people here in the state, and I thought it would be very good to go over it. And all this info is just always good for us to know and be aware of, especially what's going on. But first off, as I said, starting with that, the main fires that are going on around Idaho, and if you've listened to the midweek report, you've gotten a couple reports on this. The main one here in Idaho is the Bench Lake Fire. It's about 8 miles south of Stanley in the Sawtooth National Forest over there. I know a lot of people are very sad. I'm worried a little bit as well, because it's such a beautiful area if you've never been. Super nice. It's like something out of Lord of the Rings for anyone that gets that reference. It started on July 11th, so it's been burning for quite a little bit. The cause, they still haven't quite determined. If it was a lightning strike or different things, it's under investigation. The current size of it is that it's burned about 2,595 acres, according to when I wrote this on Friday, which that would be July 27th is when I'm recording this. So as of that date, it was about 2,595. It's about 23% contained, so not great. The current amount of firefighters and personnel there that are working on it is about 468. So it's threatened some areas. There hasn't been an evacuation as of the recording of this, but there's a stay and watch and stuff. It's next to the lake there. The salmon area has been closed down, lodge and resort and different things there, and people have been moved away from it. So that is one part that's been had, and then the city's kind of watching and trying to be careful, and they're recommending people don't go there, even if you're someone like me that usually does new stuff and maybe wants to take photography and things, maybe ground photography, but drone photography, please don't do that. Ground's aircraft, and that's not good for firefighting. The other one is, it's not actually here in Idaho, but there's two that are over in eastern Oregon that are actually affecting us a lot here in the Treasure Valley. First is the Cow Fire over there. It's in Malheur County, Oregon, near the border. That one also started on July 11th. Would you look at that? The cause of it was human cause, so probably someone like a cigarette butt, or maybe they started a campfire and they didn't put it out, or machinery or something. Currently, it is at a size where it's burned about 133,408 acres. So quite a bit more there, and it's only about 16% contained, but at least there's a little containment going on there. As for firefighter crews, there's approximately about 340 crew members over there fighting the fires and working on it. So a little bit smaller, I think, than what we talked about. Actually, no, it's a little smaller than what we talked about over there in Stanley. So that's one that's burning over there in Oregon. Another one that's over there, and it's the one that's the biggest one, has had some serious effects. And if you've tried to travel westward to go fishing by Brownlee, warning, can't get to Brownlee at the moment, is the Durkee Fire. It's also over there in eastern Idaho near the border, same kind of county rough area as well. So you have these two that have made their own super fire. That one started a little later on July 17th. The cause of that was lightning. Is about 239,000 acres. Oh, look, round number, there's not a lot of change in there, that it's burned so far. And the scariest part about it is that it is 0% contained as of recording this. And then as for firefighters, there's 635. Last time I remember recording or researching this, it is the highest priority fire that's currently burning in the United States, so a lot of focus and efforts being put on it. Another notable part of this fire is that it has creeped, because of the 0% containment, it's creeped pretty close to I-84, same one that we have going through the valley. It curves up and goes into Oregon there. And so they had to close down part of the freeway because the fire was moving that direction. They didn't know if it would hit it or not, or how fast it would move and different stuff. Last I heard, they've been able to just keep it open so far for a little bit, or they close it at nights and stuff. So if you're wondering why is there all this issue and stuff, or if you're planning on traveling westward into I-84, you may want to avoid it in that area of Malheur County because of the fire. But coming back to Idaho and a little further up north, you have the Texas fire. The location of that is east of Kendrick in the Latah or Nez Perce County line in Idaho there. That one started a little later than the past two we talked about on July 15th. That one was also human caused, obviously a little bit smaller than the ones over in Oregon at about 1,575 acres, still a massive amount of area to be burned. But the encouraging element as I'm recording this is that it's 70% contained. That's the last update I got. So they've actually got over that 50%. And they've done that with about 189 personnel that are working on that and trying to secure it and get it into full containment. The impact of it is that it's burned 4 primary residents and 6 outbuildings have been lost in the fire there. As far as I've read on that, there hasn't been per se any evacuation orders, but a couple people's houses damaged or destroyed in some form there. Thankfully, they're getting it controlled. And also with this one, the Federal Emergency Agency, or FEMA, has authorized funds to go to the firefighters to help with the costs that are going on up there because it's more of a rural area and there's extra resources that are needed to fight that and get it contained there. But that brings us down into the bottom part here. So we've gone through the fires that are burning here in Idaho and over in Oregon. But the other part we need to look at, and I teased earlier, is what causes wildfires, right? For those of us that don't grow up here, you might not know about it. The biggest leading thing is actually human caused. That accounts for about 75 to 90% of all wildfires. The primary ways that humans cause it is debris burned. Oftentimes, if you're in rural parts of the state, you'll see it. Actually, a really nice thing to be able to do, but people burning waste and stuff and other materials can get out of control. You're in your backyard and you've got a bunch of old limbs and stuff. You're like, I don't want to pay to go to the dump, and I live out in the countryside, so I have my burn area. Most people, if you're listening, you probably know what I mean. You go and you burn it and you get rid of it, but sometimes it can get out of control. People don't plan, they don't have water on hand, they don't properly keep it away from the cheatgrass and stuff, and it spreads really fast. Another one is campfires. As I teased earlier, they are improperly managed, and you leave a campsite and you think, oh, I put the fire out. Nope, you haven't put the fire out. It's still burning, and it sparks off into something else that's unmanaged. Another one is vehicle related, sparks from like exhaust, dragging chains, or cigarettes thrown from windows and stuff. When people are traveling, those can start fires as well. Another one is equipment use. I think there was one I was reading that some people were like using, they were trying to cut all the grass down so there was less fuel for it to burn because there was area where a bunch of cheatgrass and weed grasses and stuff, and then the equipment had a spark which caught the field and the area they were trying to prevent a fire from starting. Another one of those is equipment uses. One that we're a little bit further away from is fireworks. That's another one, improper use of them and catching fire on things. A lesser known one, you have firearms. Obviously, there's a little bit of explosive and fire happening in a firearm, as the name implies, and oftentimes those can catch fire. But the other 10%, or if you're looking at the 75, causes of it are more natural-based. As we saw above, one of the reasons there for one of the fires was lightning strikes. They are the most common cause of wildfires in the region here, because you'll have different storms that move through and lightning will strike and catch fires in different areas, which doesn't help when you have the conditions we have right now, which it's a yearly thing. This year we've had a little bit more rain. Past years we have, but it always happens with the cheatgrass. It'll dry out, which, interestingly enough, you want to go look that up. Cheatgrass is not native to North America. Interesting thing to go look up. But is those dry conditions, which we have for extended periods. It often doesn't rain a lot, especially here in the valley, in the areas that sometimes get those fires. Up north, it's not as bad because it might rain a little bit more, but it'll cause it to be extremely dry, and grass fires and things can start, which then can lead to more substantial fires. Especially with the hot temperatures. I think we've broken a couple records this week in the Treasure Valley for the hottest temperatures. I haven't gone to see if Lewiston has broken their record, which, if you didn't know, go listen to the midweek report, which will be coming out on Wednesday. I'll add a little bit of tease of some of the records in the state with temperature-wise. But yeah, as those temperatures go up, dries things out, you have that. And then another part that's actually really interesting, and I had some people talking to me about, is there was worries about the Malheur County or the Durkee fire that was happening over in Oregon, and they were like, "There's thunderstorms coming through. It's gonna put the fire out. That's gonna be good. I'm glad we're getting thunderstorms." That's actually really scary for firefighters or wildlife firefighters, because with those thunderstorms, yeah, you're getting rain, but you're getting a lot of wind. And when you're putting, fire needs both fuel, energy, and oxygen. It has the fuel, it already has the energy because it's burning, and if you add more oxygen, that supercharges it, and then the wind causes it to move even more. So strong winds, we've had a bit more windy season this year, can cause those fires to even spread worse and damage more things and move erratically and make it just really hard for firefighters to fight it, rather than if it's just still and hot. That's actually easier for them to fight it, because then the fire gradually, slowly moves. They can predict, get things ready, do back burns and different strategies to try to contain it and keep it in there. But we went through all the information there on the fires that are going on, the primary causes. But for someone that might be outside Idaho, and even I thought that there was more this year, you might be asking, why are there so many wildfires in the Northwest? One, it's rural. But first, surprisingly, when I went research, I had to double check myself. We don't have the highest fire risk in the nation. That primarily goes to California, because they'll have more drier conditions than we will. Another thing which I couldn't verify in the research, but I've heard some people that I can't cite, they're just friends that have done stuff. Here in Idaho, if you're driving around the rural parts of it, you'll see where they're saying, hey, here's a post, we're doing a controlled burn, don't call fire, blah, blah, blah. California, as far as I'm aware, doesn't do a lot of controlled burns. So what a controlled burn is, you have an area where you're controlling starting a fire, but the Forest Service or BLM will purposely start a fire in an area to burn all the fuel out when there's not very much. So the fire is just very light, not super bad. You burn it, and then if a fire or a lightning strike does hit, there's nothing for it to catch on. There's nothing for it to start. As far as I'm aware of, or looked at stuff, and I could be wrong on this, California doesn't do that as much, so they also will increase the fire risk because there's just more fuel in the ground. But in general, if you're looking about the amount of fires and stuff and their size, California has it a lot worse than we usually do. But specifically for this season, we've been seeing a little bit more. A lot of those primarily have been in Oregon than it has been here, but for just the Pacific Northwest. Oregon had about 38 active fires as of July of 2024. So they're having a lot, which is nearly as many as Washington, Idaho, and California combined this year. We've decided to buck that trend, as I said earlier, with having a bit more. Thankfully, not a lot of them are in Idaho. I think last year we had more than we've had this year. Mainly, we only have our two, the one in the Sawtooth there by Stanley, and then the one up north. But Oregon is having so much, and a lot of the air that we get and the jet stream and stuff comes across the ocean. It comes across Oregon, and then it will come to us. So that's why it's probably pretty smoky around most of the state. So with that also said, the firefighting is really difficult, tough stuff. So please be praying for the firefighters, that they would be safe, that they would be well rested when they're doing this. Because if you look at some of the photos, it's the things they go into, like something out of a film, like an apocalyptic film, the fire and the smoke and everything, and it's hot, it's dusty, and you have animals you're dealing with that are trying to escape the fire, and if those animals are a little bit more aggressive and different stuff like that, it's a whole different thing. So please keep them in your prayers, especially there over in Oregon. I know the firefighting teams across the Pacific Northwest, and I think it's across the nation, but it might just be here in the Pacific Northwest, that will share our firefighters. So if Idaho has a lot of fires, Oregon and Washington will send theirs. And if Oregon and Washington, or Oregon in this case, has it, we'll send a bunch of ours to help with maintaining that. So it's a group effort, that we're not just doing it state by state. Now, if you want to take some practical takeaways from this, the biggest reason being temperatures. It's just a very warm season. I don't know if Oregon had as much rain or stuff as we have here. Obviously, I cover more Idaho things than Oregon things, but that's probably contributed to it. And for you guys out there, especially when you're going hiking and traveling, because we love it, Idaho is just so pretty. I'm going to be getting out to it, taking the week off and going up there to McCall this next week, is with that 70 to 90% of wildfires coming from people, to try to apply that to our lives, to be careful when we're starting fires, be it if you're camping, make sure the fire's put out. That means dousing it in a lot of water, waiting a little bit, because sometimes you can even throw water on it and it doesn't completely go out. So make sure your fire's out. Make sure it's not running. If you're someone who likes to smoke, please do not flick it on the side of the road. We do not want to start a fire. There are so many of those that if you travel in the Treasure Valley along the freeway in different interchanges, you'll see where they started, from either cars or probably people flicking cigarettes or things. So there's a lot that can be done to prevent them. And hopefully the Forest Service will continue to do controlled burns and different stuff to be more preventative rather than waiting until they happen. But hopefully that gave you a great overview of how fires start in Idaho, where we compare to the rest of the nation, the ones going on right now, and why it's so smoky for you and stuff, and that you're able to step away knowing more and how to be careful about not causing them in your own explorations of our beautiful state. In any case, that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for tuning in for the entire thing and made it this far. It means a ton. I really hope you found it both enjoyable and informative. That's the goal of this, is so you can be educated more about Idaho and what's going on around it and be engaged. If we missed anything or got something wrong, please feel free to reach out to us via email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter at localyocalidaho. We really appreciate your support and your feedback. It helps us really understand the stories that you want to know and how to make the content that you guys are looking for and to cover the important stories going on across Idaho. With that said, that's all for now. Have a great rest of your week and Godspeed.